Welcome to Do Wonders, the podcast that highlights the incredible work and stories of the Centria Autism team. I'm Timothy Yeager.
And I'm Lisa Cunningham. In each episode, we take you behind the scenes to meet the dedicated professionals who make a difference in the lives of our clients and their families.
Through these conversations, you'll get to know the personal journeys, the challenges, and the successes that truly define our team.
Whether you're part of the Centria family or just curious about the amazing work happening here, we're glad you're with us.
So join us in diving into the wonders of Centria Autism. Well, welcome, Brit.
Thank you.
So great to have you here.
Nice to be here. Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to be here.
So just to jump in and introduce you, how about you tell everyone who you are and what you do at Centria?
Yeah. So what I do at Centria is I'm a member of the functional assessment team, and we basically head up the mentorship and training, kind of the bigger initiatives at Centria, and we do foundations of care mentorship. We've done some SBT mentorship last year, and I know before I had joined the team, and just kind of working with clinicians, and also especially in the most recent round of foundational plan training and mentorship, we've been working with the leadership all around the country. So that's been a really exciting thing and something that I have come to just really value at Centria. And I guess a little bit about me. I have been a BCBA for several years and in and out of the field for, I think the number keeps going up. So I think around more than 15 years. I'm like, it's way more than 10 now. And I just felt like I needed to do something serving and helping other people, and kids were kind of my jam. And so I quit that job and I started a job working at a group home that was kind of modeled after Father Flanagan's homes in Kansas City, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. And so just working in a neighborhood of
Nebraska.
Individuals. Nebraska. You're right. It's Nebraska.
Omaha.
I'm not going to bring up geography again because that is not. And so that's just been something that I have wanted to do, I think, since day one, is just kind of work in a field that is helping others and kind of spreading compassion and kindness and giving someone something to look forward to and have hope towards. And I just kind of stumbled on ABA in undergrad and kind of have been in a journey working amongst a lot of different places and with a lot of different people and with a lot of wonderful mentors and some less good mentors. And I just have kind of had a long journey, and it's ended me up here, which is, I think, pretty cool, because I think that has embodied the last 15, 18 years for me to end up in a position with a company that's kind of doing the things that Centria is doing.
And where are you now, Brit?
I'm out in Washington State on the eastern side, so in Spokane. Mm-hmm. Yep, and I live here with my husband and son and dogs and a horse, and I'm an animal lover, and my husband isn't in the same kind of field, but he's in, I feel like we always have things to talk shop about because he's an IO psychologist, and he looks at like big business aspect of things, and It's kind of neat to see where the crossover is sometimes. And he's always like, I could never in my life do. He's like, you have 8 meetings a day. He's like, absolutely not.
As an IO psychologist, I'm sure he would try to fix that.
Yeah, he would. And also he works with like big data sets and research and stuff. So it is kind of cool to see, our data sets are very small in comparison to, looking at big companies and the government and different things like that. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Brit, I would love to know a little bit, maybe thinking about this podcast. And I think we get a ton of team members that start out, hopefully, like behavior technicians wanting to understand more about ABA. And I think it's so cool, the number of individuals that we see that start out as techs, go through our practicum program, become a clinician, and really they're hungry for what's next, what comes after that. And maybe they don't want to be, the director of clinical services, but a career path kind of similar to yours. And I would
Mm-hmm.
like to know, as you kind of reflect on your career history, what are things that you said yes to that landed you in a role like this?
Let's see. I think for me, and it might not match up with everybody's story, is I kind of, first of all, I moved and said yes to a position that I had never worked in. It was like a school position at like a private program. And so I think saying yes to things that might be a little bit uncomfortable and kind of challenge you a little bit, because you never know, like, who you're going to meet that could provide that mentorship. And if you stay in a place of comfort, which I was at my first job for 3-4 years, I think that you might not be inspired to kind of try something different and experience things that might lead to that career development.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's kind of a theme that we've talked about a couple times on this podcast, is that, growth inherently comes through a level of discomfort, right? And so I can appreciate that. Yeah. And I think it's saying yes to new, sometimes scary, exciting challenges.
Absolutely.
I would love to know too, what was it that brought you to Centria?
Yeah. So I think there's lots of buzzwords, right? Like trauma-informed ABA and compassionate care and those types of things. And I think, I don't know. I feel like when I look back on my career and the types of, ABA procedures and different things, I think it has shaped up over time. And I have been, I have done things not compassionately in the past, but I think there was always an undertone for me of that compassion and caring and bringing hope to families. I feel like in-home was my jam for a lot of years, and just seeing that growth. And I think that about, I would say 4 years ago or so, I just kind of dove in a little bit to network a little bit, to kind of be a little more involved in social media and different things like that. And I mean, to be honest, kind of stumbled upon the PFA SPT Facebook page
Yeah,
and was like, this is a group of people that I feel like I really can relate to. And how do I get more of that? And so I think that through networking with, I mean, honestly, like-minded people, I think
sure.
that are talking about those types of things and what they're doing at their companies, what they're doing kind of individually with their programming. I think that I was really attracted and drawn to that. And I think that I've experienced burnout because of, I guess, the lack of buy-in, especially from leadership at different places. And so I was a little burnt out on that. And I was wanting something different. And I knew about what Centria was doing for the last couple of years. Hillary is someone that I, had known and kind of consulted with another workplace. But I think I never thought I would necessarily end up in a role like this, just because, I don't know, I think some of that doubt and hey, I'm not sure if I'm as good enough of a clinician or different things like that, obviously, like, jump into your mind sometimes. And so when that opportunity was brought to me or mentioned to me to apply to, I think I was like, heck yes, I want to be a part of that, because I see that Centria not only embodies those values, but they're actually doing it. So you could talk to several people in different areas of leadership and also, clinicians, RBTs. And I think that they're all seeing that change. And I was also really impressed with, like, the data that's being
Mhm.
collected and shared. And I just think that you don't always see that initiative and growth and really push from bigger companies. A lot of times I think they're kind of like, we're doing well and we're successful to an extent. And I just saw that being a way that maybe we could make a pretty big influence in the field of ABA. And I think that at the end of the day, I was thinking about, I mean, legacy seems like a really big word, but also,
Yeah.
like, what do I want in 10 years? And in my interview, I remember that Timothy answered a question. I said, where does Centria want to be in 5 years or 10 years? And I know that I'm not going to quote you exactly, Timothy, but you just said you really wanted to be the leader in changing the field of ABA. And I think that you need to be somewhat of a bigger company and have the numbers and the research and the amount of people to be able to really make an influential difference in the field. So I wanted to be a part of that. And I've been unbelievably lucky to get that opportunity over the last year.
Connecting a couple of those things, being a leader and driving change and like throwing yourself into situations where you're uncomfortable, I think describe you quite well in the work that you've done at Centria. Like when I think about you, Britt, I think about our mentorship, the change that we're going about, but then also throwing you into centers where we may not have had the most alignment or clinicians that were struggling in support, and building relationships, building like a supportive culture, and then leaving that place or coming back to that place with like a completely different environment as a result. Now, I know some of the centers that you've gone to, like you have welcoming parties of people that like are looking forward to you going in there, which, I'm sure wasn't the case when it started. And I thought maybe we could spend a little bit of time talking about that and like your approach to some of those uncomfortable situations when supporting people, and how you go about, changing that around and building, something great from something that was quite challenged initially.
Yeah. I think I've been asked several times just by random people, like, if there was magic dust or like something you could teach someone that really was like the heart of that mentorship or that, change or being that change agent. And I think that's been something that I give a lot of thought of. And we just, in this past week, we're reading a leadership book with my team, and we had a whole list of values that you needed to basically pare down to 2. And I found that very challenging. I was like, I'm all over this sheet here. And the one that stuck out to me the most and is related to a lot of other values, I think, is community. And I feel like there's a lot of things involved in community, trust and relationships. And I don't want to use the word family because I think that family is separate than work, but just communication, all of those kind of things go along with community to me. And I just think of these locations that I go to as communities, and, what do I do to kind of build, those relationships and communities up from, maybe a place of, I think, uncertainty. I think every clinic I've gone to that is struggling with culture or kind of our initiatives and the foundations of care, I see similar traits of, hey, we don't know what to do. Maybe the leaders seem hesitant. Maybe we need a little more knowledge, some compassion and kindness around them not, maybe taking initiative to make these changes happen. And I just think by coming in and rolling up your sleeves and kind of modeling these things and saying, I can say a lot of things, but I'll also show you, how to implement these procedures. I'll sit down and write programs. I'll sit down and write your foundational plan with you and show you how to teach your technicians how to do those things. I think that goes a long way instead of just kind of, doing a training or having a conversation or showing them a visual or something like that. I think one of the BTs at my one of the first places I talk about being thrown in, I feel like I got thrown right into going to Phoenix right after I started. And I went to, it was an in-home session, so not a clinic, but the BT was like, I was really nervous and you just like started running programs and stuff with the learner and just started, doing these things that I didn't expect. And it was just kind of refreshing for them, I think. And so I think that to me is something that really means a lot. And it meant a lot to me as a BT also when I worked before a BT was even a thing. I liked when someone came in and showed me what to do and gave me feedback and walked the walk, I guess. And so I really try to do that alongside of building those relationships and rapport up. And I think I'm so lucky to be able to do that, and that I have all of these relationships in all of these different states, and visiting them is just like the icing on the cake now, because I know who I'm going to see and I know I'm going to meet new people. And that has been such a positive experience for me that I feel very fortunate to be able to be the change agent that gets to go to all these different places that are struggling.
Has that always been a skill of yours as a leader, or is it something you've had to learn over time?
Yeah, I think it's always been a skill, but I think maybe I wasn't always good at rolling it out quickly. Or I always look at, like, some people are so good at going in and asking the right questions or looking at the right things immediately. And I think that was the piece that I had to sharpen. Because I mean, when you go, you would love to spend a month at a location and really, dig deep dive, but you have not that long, and you also want to see the change happening sooner. So I think the values and the of community and of relationship building has always been there, but I think how I have gone about it and things that I've learned from mentors that I've had have made me better at it. So I think I've been able to do it quicker and better. And I'm not saying that relationships should be quick or different things, but I've been able to get a lot of trust and buy-in, I think, from people quicker, because I think my sincerity shows, right away. And I think that also by being a better behavior analyst too, of like being able to ask the right questions quicker, shows that I know what I'm talking about also. And I think that builds trust and rapport too in the field and at Centria.
That was incredible. So thank you for sharing both of those things.
Very nervous. So thank you.
Oh, no, that was great. I'm just like, wow, I feel like I could listen to you talk for hours on end. And like some of the themes that I hear, I mean, certainly credibility, but it sounds like you just approach your work understanding that from like a baseline, we're all humans. Everyone's endeavoring, right, to try to do a good job. And the empathy that I heard, right, the kindness. And I think, even just the courage to say, let's just start, let's just jump in, and the modeling of behavior. I have no doubt that people feel very comfortable and like seen, and they see themselves in you. And to make it such a comfortable space where they can, say what they're struggling with. I'm sure you do a lot to normalize that and say, I've been there. I'm hearing that now. I remember when I was a behavior technician. I think as I reflect, those are just really incredible qualities. I can see why you say community is important, because those are all fundamentals for building community, and they serve you so well in your role. Because I would agree Timothy and I have talked about this, like your reputation precedes you, and that you're someone that people just gravitate towards working with. Like you have that very magnetic, and it's not necessarily like, oh, she's so charismatic. It's that you're in it with them and you model the behavior and you show people and you do it in such a kind way. And that's really special.
I think there's one too, though, humility. I think
absolutely
the thing that I'll just like talk about some of my experiences of like throwing yourself into situations like that where you may not know what the right answer is, you may not know what the right question is a very uncomfortable position. It's even more uncomfortable when you're not humble and you think that you're the person that needs to have all the answers and should have all the answers, right? And there's a level of like being secure in this humility that like I may not know the right answer right now. I'm okay with that. And I may be okay with them seeing me as like a person who doesn't know the right answer at that moment, but I'm going to work through it and we're going to figure it out together.
Absolutely.
So like, I think it's just like a skill and an approach that's underdeveloped in a lot of people, and myself included.
Yeah, and I think I hope it's okay if I just continue that thought for a second.
Absolutely.
I think that makes people comfortable. Mm-hmm. I think that it comes from a place absolutely not to concentrate on something negative, but I have been told by leaders before to always know everything and never go into a situation like you're not the biggest expert. And I feel like I always knew that wasn't right. and I was like, I'm uncomfortable with that because I'm a lifelong learner. And I just think that's a huge reason of being in the field. And it was always uncomfortable to me. And being told this, never say, I don't know, or I'll find out from someone else, like literally just tell them something. And I feel like that's very dishonest. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that people know I won't do that. So it's caused conflicts before in the past. Um, I think I'm better now at asking the right questions and looking at the right things to be able to help them find that answer, though. So I think that that's a skill development piece that, like, that I've gotten a little bit better at. Maybe not quite as efficient as some, but I think that I can say that sounds like a really serious or big problem, and let's investigate it and be curious about it together. And I think modeling that too is a leadership skill. Like, that's something that maybe
For sure.
next time when they are faced with a problem or someone asks them a question they don't know, maybe that would cause them to do a similar thing. And I think that's really helpful when you're teaching leaders, especially, is to be curious and is to investigate things and then maybe say, hey, I looked into this, I asked these questions, and I'm still stuck. And then I would be a safe person to ask because I was the one that, in the beginning was like, I don't know, like, let's investigate that together. So I think then you're building your community by not knowing something, and that's okay.
To be able to ask the right questions and be curious, you have to be in that moment, like living in that present moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
what takes people out of that present moment is when you're having like thoughts about your thoughts, right? And you're or
Mm-hmm.
thoughts about how you're perceiving other people's thoughts
Sure.
about you in those moments. And so you're thinking about things and you're not thinking about the here and now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
having a level of humility and security with like what's happening now allows you to be open to like those experiences and having those questions. And when you talk about like new leaders need to have all the answers, like we talk about that in orientation every week, which is we don't expect you to have all the answers. And
Absolutely.
it's a very flawed approach to like go into any situation to think that you should have all the answers.
Or that you even
Very
could.
flawed.
That
Even
you
could,
even
yeah.
could.
Like,
Yeah.
how is that even a thing that you're
I
telling me
know.
right now?
With every promotion I get, what I continue to realize is like we know less and less, right? Like there's
Yes.
more out there that's we're unsure about, and it's our job to try to figure it out and solve problems around getting us closer to the answers. But like we're not gonna have all the answers.
Well,
Yeah.
and to go into a situation like a family's home and knowing everything, like,
Sure.
about the culture, about their dynamic, about their child, like, that is the opposite of leadership. And
Yeah.
so I think that always made me uncomfortable. And I've not seen that at Centria. And that makes me feel very comfortable.
I'd like to connect something there. And I think curiosity is such an important value. And as I think about that, like almost humility and curiosity as leaders have to go
Mhm.
hand in hand because if you feel like you have to know the answers and you're defending something, you're less likely to be curious. Because one
Yeah.
of those, you're being motivated out of fear
Yeah.
versus, and then almost nothing good comes from being motivated by fear, right? I think we can all say that. But I feel like I had this, I don't know, aha moment like a couple of years ago. And I was brought up in a home that definitely valued having a respect for authority. And I was very fortunate that the adults who were in authority roles in my life, like, were trying to make the right decisions for the right reasons. So that like served me well for a long time. But I think it gave me this false sense throughout my career of thinking that people in charge, like at some point in life, I'm going to be like them and I'm going to have it all figured out.
Mm.
And it was like
Yeah.
some point a couple of years ago, I'm like, wow, the people in charge do not have it all figured out, but they have the ability to be super curious and driven to try to find a solution for what is happening or to put a system in place to solve for it. So it's actually less about figuring it all out was not the finish line that I thought
Yep.
that it was for so many
Yeah.
years. And it was like the curiosity, the tenacity, the collaboration. It was so many different skills that I wish I would have learned that sooner. I wish someone would have told me that having it all figured out is not where you want to be in life because then you're losing the ability to be curious and you're assuming that there's like that's self-actualization or something. And I just, yeah, I guess I wish I could tell my younger career self that being humble and being curious will always serve you better than having all the answers or feeling like you need to.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes into like the first question about a little bit about like, what's something you did and you try something new and you get a little uncomfortable, and I think you are being curious. You're
Sure.
like, hey, this looks like it might be cool, but also I'm worried about it. And that's
Yeah.
okay. And then maybe it's a great move, and maybe it's one that shapes the next decision or something that you the next journey or part of your adventure that you go on. So I think they're a little interrelated, and I could not agree with you more though that I wish that I knew that sooner, because it was quite a few years, I think, before I realized that I don't need to know everything, and I didn't need to try to, and I think I would have developed other skills a little bit quicker too. So
yeah.
Well, one thing we know about behavior, like in evolution, is that as behavior varies, you get shaped in different ways, right? And if you're just stuck in one path, you're robbing yourself from different learning experiences. So like saying yes may end up being like a great experience, or it may not be a good experience, but regardless, you're going to learn from it and you're going to improve and you're going to grow as long as you're open to the experiences that you're having. I love that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that applies to like mentorship that you've had, or experiences you've had with past people that were leaders in your life, because I think, like you just said, good or bad, it's going to help mold you into the person that you become, and you can take pieces away from each experience instead of just looking at it like, wow, that was a disaster. Like, what did you learn to do or not do from that situation? And I think that I was fortunate enough uh, to have really strong mentors that not only challenged me, in this like compassionate care things. Maybe they had a completely different way of doing things, but they almost all inspired me to be curious. And I think that has shaped me as, who I am personally and professionally. And I think that every relationship wasn't perfect, and I don't think we would practice the same way, but I really tried hard to take the time I had with those people and pull out what I could learn and pass on to other people. And no matter if we matched on opinions, if we butted heads all the time, I think some of those people challenge you the most, and you can have the most learning happen in those situations too. So I think that is good for new behavior analysts to think about, is those situations can also be big learning opportunities too, instead of just terrible situations. So I really challenge people to do that often, is to look at things in a learning aspect and from a lens of curiosity.
So today's your 1 year anniversary.
It is.
And you've had a number of experiences in this year. So how are you different today as a director of functional assessment and treatment implementation than you were on day one? And what do you think of those like key experiences that you've had like shape that?
Yeah. I think,
Heavy hitter.
again,
Heavy hitter question. Sorry.
Yeah.
heavy hitter. I'm like, who do I include in this? It's like a shout out at the end of an Emmy or Oscar or something. So I think that, first of all, I'm surrounded by people with just an unbelievable wealth of knowledge and experience. And I think that was something I didn't have access to. And so, and also people who approach things with a humbleness also, that I was never afraid to ask those questions and say, hey, I don't even remember, how to do this, or I'm uncertain about how to approach this situation. So being a part of a team that challenges you in just a kind and compassionate way has made me grow as a behavior analyst, just in, my skill set of asking those questions and coming to those answers and conclusions in a variety of situations, across clinics and markets and leaders and clinicians. And so I think that being in that environment has shaped my behavior to be better. And I think also seeing people and seeing learners and seeing clinicians from just a wide variety of situations and clinics and in-home settings. It's really given me the opportunity to grow there too, and build those relationships and say and reflect. I feel like reflective practice has just become a daily thing for myself and doing with just myself, but also other people. So I think I've developed that skill a bit more. And I think that because, obviously Centria is larger and has, access to so many more people. I just think that I've learned a little thing from everybody and every experience. I mean, the learners included, that it's just kind of made me grow in that community. And I can't even, I'm trying to think of, I think certain visits to markets have, shaped my perspective on how to, I think, look at a bigger picture too, of like, I can see the picture over all the different markets that I work in. And even though I'm just here at this one clinic, I can see how things tie into other things. And I think it's made me a little bit better at making big changes more relatable and maybe more hopeful and maybe more achievable. And I think that is good when you go into a situation that people seem, pretty overwhelmed. And being able to revisit locations that were struggling so much, I think those are my moments that it's just like everything's worth it. You go to an overlap or you go to, and they're just like, oh my gosh, how last week we worked on this? Well, I changed all of these programs to match all of these things in the foundational plan. And like just seeing the dots be connected and seeing that at like a clinic wide and then a market wide level, I think has just made me pinch myself that this is what I get to be a part of. And I tell my team that all the time when we try to do like weekly wins and things like that. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to be a broken record, but it is always similar, but it's always related to the clinicians and the people who do those things, every day and are making those changes within Centria.
That's awesome. I think if you were to give a piece of advice to somebody who was starting out in the field, what would it be?
And that's a big question too.
I know. And I'm just thinking about like, you've just had I know that is huge, but you've had such a bright career. I'd love to know for somebody who just like, how do they, start off the right way?
I mean, I think all of the language and themes kind of tie together with, be curious and be compassionate towards yourself and other people, and always keep learning. Like you never know everything, so always strive to understand and see things from, I think, seeing things from other people's perspective. I mean, you could say that's curiosity, but really, really doing that in your professional life, I think will always challenge you, make you a little more uncomfortable, but also bring you access to situations and to people that, can kind of guide you and shape your behavior.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, Britt, I've really enjoyed this conversation and just getting to know you. And I know the people that are listening are going to really learn a lot from you. And the people that have already worked with you have learned a lot. So it's been great to get to know you a little bit better, talk to you, and to really appreciate all the work that you do for us at Centria.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy.
Of course.
I appreciate it as well.
One thing Britt talked about was, to a degree, one of my like mantras for the year, which is like being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Okay.
And like putting yourself in situations that might be difficult or challenging or unknown, right? And being curious about those. And there's a principle or a term that we call in behavior analysis called escape. And escape is something you do to avoid, prevent, not avoid, but escape is something to leave, get away from, eliminate any aversive stimulus. So You know, like in our work, you might think about like, or even your children and my children. You
Yeah.
give them a direction, and instead of complying with that direction, they run away, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a obvious form of escape, right?
Yeah, a literal.
Well, yeah, literal form of escape. Um, but the escape can happen in these moments when you feel really uncomfortable. You might
Mm,
engage in things to like not feel comfortable, right? So it may be easier for a leader to just like make up an answer and like give a direction than sit in the discomfort of like not knowing the answer, right?
sure.
Um, as a leader, you may like, you know, as a clinical director, you may walk into a situation where like you don't know how to help this, you know, this client or technician or BCBA. You may not know the right things to say, so you may just sit in your office, right? And you
Mm,
may not go out onto the floor, right? That might get into more what we call avoidance as well, but they're similar in that sense. And there's something that I've had to wrestle with quite a bit of late, which is sitting in the uncomfortable feeling of like not knowing what to do, not having the right answer, not knowing how to proceed,
sure.
you know, and that's a hard thing for me as a leader is to sit in
Mhm.
discomfort and like be present in the moment and acknowledge those things,
Yeah.
like bring judgment to those times. Um, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of people. I think that especially new leaders coming into new situations, embracing those uncomfortable moments is can be a challenge.
Yeah. That makes me think about two things. And I appreciated what he said when we were talking to Brit, that it's like, be present, be in the moment, because if not, you're having this almost like internal dialogue
Yeah,
where you're, probably either judging yourself compared to others or you're judging yourself compared to your standards of yourself. But what you're doing at that point is probably internalizing something and going to a not beneficial place.
yeah.
Right. And
You're overlaying a narrative and judgment,
correct.
right? When you
Yeah.
just didn't talk about the facts.
And to literal no productive end.
Yeah,
Like that's just never going to serve you, where instead being in the moment and as I think about that, because I'm reflecting, I'm like, okay, I've had moments like that. And so I can see myself as an escape or things that my kids are doing, right? To just avoid. And yes, I'm not trying to, I said avoid. I know it's not avoidance, but they could serve similar functions.
avoidance
But
is like never even come in contact with the aversive stimulus and just avoiding it altogether. Whereas escape,
got it.
like you are feeling it and then you leave,
And then you pull away.
pull away.
And
Yeah,
which is interesting because as I'm thinking about, gosh, what would I encourage like people leaders to do in those moments? What would I encourage a team member to do in the moment? And I guess you tell me from like a behavior analytics perspective, this is sound, but I'm just thinking like getting comfortable, even for a few seconds and being uncomfortable, even if you had to just count to 10
yep.
with silence or count to 5 with silence before starting with something, like, would that be a good way to overcome it? So you're starting to at least build that sort of muscle with that level of discomfort, or
100%.
what would you recommend?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly it. So like my coach talks about doing reps and like
Yeah.
think about it as like working a muscle, right? Um, generally you work out so that when you are in a position to like need like muscle
Mhm.
strength, you have it, right? You
Mhm.
don't work out in tough times, you work out in a controlled, easy time. And so she talks to me about like, what are the things that you're doing to be present in the moment when it's not hard? So
Mhm.
that when it is hard, you have things that you can fall back to,
Yep.
right? And so, some things that I do is um, I feel my fingers.
Mhm.
So I just like try to push as hard as I can to like feel the ridges in my fingers, or I'll take a deep breath and count, or I'll
Mhm.
say a color and then I'll look for things in the room that like are that color, just like bring me here in the moment.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do when you're not stressed and you're not in that uncomfortable spot. But when you
Sure.
are, you want to be able to go back to those skills that you've developed.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like step 1 is be present in that moment and learn to tolerate
Yeah.
the discomfort,
And even
right?
talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
I've taken a step of late just to tell my team, like, I don't like, just like, I'm feeling I need to have the answer. I don't have the answer. Right. Or like
Mm.
just acknowledging like what you're feeling in those moments. I think it's important. And then
Yeah.
sticking to the truth and the facts about it and not the story that you use to interpret like those truth or facts.
Yeah. I feel like that's also helpful. And, I always like to, like, I'm kind of like a preparedness person. Like, I like to think like, oh, if this and that, I'm sure some of that's my
Yeah.
anxiety, right? But I like to have a plan for certain things. And as I think about that, it's like I like to have a couple phrases or sayings in my pocket, right? And so I almost think like if we're talking to new leaders or someone who thinks they need to have the answer, like a new SC, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, practicing being comfortable with, that's a great question. Can I find out for you?
Yeah.
And, having a few things like that where you don't feel like you have to have the answer or you feel like you need to say something and you're going to be making it up, like
Mhm.
just having a couple of like sit in the discomfort for a little bit, name the discomfort. I think that's a great
Yeah.
strategy. And then have one or two phrases that humanize the experience that you're experiencing. And what I have also noticed, I think a lot of the expectations we have about ourselves or what we think other people are going to think are just often not the reality of it. And just trying, right? Just making well, I'm going to just say this and see what happens.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, it doesn't go as bad as you would think, especially if you're doing the right thing,
100%.
And so,
This takes us down a further path that we could talk about another time, which is like our thoughts aren't us, right? Like
Mhm.
we think in our head, a variety of things come to us, right?
Sure.
They're somewhat related to the experiences that were had, right?
Hmm.
And I'm bringing this up because the statement that we talked about with Brit around curiosity is important in these moments as well. It's like when you're in those uncomfortable moments and you're having these things like pop in your head, your thoughts, being curious about those is one way to like create distance as well. It's like,
Mm.
I'm feeling this. I'm thinking this. I'm wondering why is that happening? Like, what about this experience is making me think about that? And like, is there something I can learn from that or not learn from that?
Hmm.
I was just, struggling with that today a little bit. And I was looking at some data and we're not improving in a way that I want us to improve. And all of a sudden, like just, I want to escape this moment, thoughts of just like judgment on myself. And then I'm like,
Sure.
I wonder how many people have ever looked at how to do this across 4,000 people in our industry, right? Like this,
Hmm.
like I'm trying to be really critical of myself and like, this is not an easy problem to solve. And
Yeah.
sitting in that discomfort, like we talked about before, like the solution to the problem is also often found in the problem, right? The obstacle is the way,
Yep.
right? And like,
Absolutely.
if that's the case, the only way you're going to find that solution is like sitting in the problem, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think about that too. And I know that we have some similarities just from our
Yeah.
conversations. And, you know, earlier in my career, I'd be like, oh, this is like the thing we need to do. And here's why. Right. And I'm trying to explain it to people and they're not seeming to understand it. And, why can't they just see it the way that I see it? Right.
Yeah.
And, kind of a classic like new leader bull in a
Oh,
china
for
shop
sure.
thinking you know everything. Right. And, my
And that's
executive coach at the
escaping the
time,
problem. Escaping's blaming them, right? Like I'm not the
sure.
problem. They're the problem.
Yeah,
They don't understand it. I'm
totally.
saying it, right?
Yeah, and the strategy that my executive coach gave me was, instead of trying to tell people, maybe ask questions.
Mm,
Ask them questions because I think you will find out what their motive is, what they're
yeah.
thinking about the topic, where they have concerns, instead of telling them how they should feel because they don't yet have your knowledge set.
Yeah.
And that to me was like a complete shift in approach and mindset to say, like, it's essentially what we're talking about here. Be curious,
Yeah.
ask. And I think to your point, it almost disarms you and like separates you from feeling like, gosh, I need to have all this stuff. It's like, oh, well, if I knew this, I wonder if I could look at the problem differently.
Right.
Or if I knew this, I wonder if I could help my colleague with giving them a data point that might be useful. And it's no longer about my thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about it also just brings it to a much more collaborative space.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that.
I know. I want to think about that more because I think, even as much as maybe we've gotten comfortable with saying, I don't know, I want to push myself to be both more present in the moment and just like approaching with curiosity because the assumptions are never what get me to a good spot with anybody, unless it's a positive assumption about people. Right.
Sure. Yeah. Those
Yeah.
negative stories never move us forward.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Lisa. Good talking to you.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks, Timothy.
And that concludes another episode of us telling the stories of our incredible staff and their work to support our powerful mission. Until next week, do wonders.